Have you ever caught yourself talking out loud when you're completely alone and then wondered, is that actually normal? The truth is, talking to yourself can be a natural part of how people organize thoughts, process emotions, and work through everyday problems. Psychology doesn't say that everyone who talks to themselves has the same personality. But research does suggest that self-talk can be connected to interesting patterns in attention, self-regulation, problem-solving, and emotional processing. So in this video, we're going beyond the stereotype that talking to yourself means you're weird. We'll explore 7 psychological traits that may help explain why some people naturally think out loud, what self-talk can reveal about the way you process life, and why understanding this habit could change the way you see yourself. Most people assume that talking to yourself in an empty room means you're losing your grip. Cognitive science says the exact opposite. In one lab study, people who spoke the name of an object out loud found it measurably faster because the sound physically altered what their eyes could detect. This one private habit is strongly linked to 7 rare traits that researchers keep finding in cognitively advanced minds. Speaking your thoughts out loud is deeply misunderstood. Society treats it like a defect. Your own family probably told you it was strange, but researchers have spent decades studying it as a mechanism, not a symptom, not a quirk. A mechanism with measurable cognitive outputs that show up in brain scans, in problem-solving speed, and in emotional regulation under pressure. Today, we are breaking down 7 rare psychological traits found in people who think out loud when the room is empty. And by the end of this video, you will finally understand the hidden architecture of your own mind. You get home, you shut the door, and something in your chest finally unclenches. You drop your keys on the counter, the apartment is quiet. Within 3 minutes, you are muttering about a Slack message you should have ignored, or an interaction at the gym that felt slightly off, or a deadline that just got moved up by 3 weeks without a budget increase. You catch yourself doing it. You pause. You look around the empty kitchen to make sure nobody heard you. You feel a brief spike of shame. You've been told your whole life that talking to yourself is a red flag. Pop culture treats it as the first symptom of losing your mind. Therapy is completely normal now, but it is expensive. So, you end up processing a lot of this on your own. Your coworkers would think it was weird. Your friends would probably laugh if they saw you pacing your living room having a full-blown debate with the air. But that is because they don't understand the mechanism. They confuse the symptom with the disease. They see the smoke and assume the house is burning down when in reality, you are just running the engine. Your brain is not short-circuiting. It is executing a necessary high-level cognitive function. The sharpest minds in history did this constantly. Einstein reportedly talked to himself during long walks. Nikola Tesla narrated his experiments out loud in an empty lab. They were not performing for an audience. They were running a cognitive protocol that required sounds to function. When you live in an open-plan office or a group chat that never sleeps, your attention is entirely fractured. Your mind absorbs a massive amount of fragmented data every single day. You are processing emails, texts, financial anxiety, and complex social dynamics simultaneously. To organize it, you need an external tool. You use your voice. You don't do it because you are defective. You do it because you are managing a cognitive load that would crush most people. Therefore, this habit isn't a quirk, it is an evolutionary adaptation. Think of your brain like a computer with too many heavy applications open. The memory is maxed out, the fan is spinning, the cursor is freezing. Talking out loud is the equivalent of opening the activity monitor and force quitting the programs that are draining the battery, which means we can measure it. And when we do, we find that people who rely on this mechanism tend to share a highly specific psychological profile. And the first reason why is incredibly practical. Trait number 1. You have high attention control. It starts with the mundane. You are running late for work. The apartment is a mess. You cannot find your phone. You do not just silently scan the room. You start saying it out loud. Phone, black case. Where did I leave the black case? Did I leave it on the counter? You think you are just frustrated. You assume you are venting nervous energy because the clock is ticking. You aren't. You are deploying a deeply ingrained mechanism called instructional self-talk. When you are looking for a physical object in a cluttered space, your visual cortex is overwhelmed. Your eyes are taking in thousands of data points per second. The coffee mug, the mail, the keys, the reflection on the glass, the shadow under the couch, it is all noise. Your brain has to process every single item just to discard it. In 2012, Cognitive scientists Gary Lupien and Daniel Swingley ran a definitive visual search study. They asked subjects to find hidden objects in complex visual environments. Half the group searched silently. The other half spoke the name of the object out loud as they looked. The results were undeniable. Speaking the word didn't just help them focus psychologically. It physically altered their visual perception. Hearing the word phone activates the specific visual properties of that object in your brain before your eyes even track them. You process the shape, the color, and the shadow milliseconds faster. You are literally using your voice as a laser pointer for your visual cortex. You know exactly what I'm describing. You do this when the environment gets chaotic. When the grocery store is packed and the fluorescent lights are humming, you mutter your list to block out the noise. When your inbox is overflowing and 3 people are pinging you simultaneously, you say the name of the urgent file out loud just to keep it in focus. When you're in a crowded parking garage and can't remember what level you parked on, you start saying it. Level 3, blue section, near the elevator. You aren't being strange. You are deploying the same perceptual shortcut Lupien measured in his lab. You just didn't know it had a name. You are forcing your brain to filter out irrelevant stimuli. You are manually overriding distraction. Most people let the environment dictate their focus. They get pulled away by every notification. They let the loudest noise in the room control their attention. They allow their visual cortex to be hijacked by whatever is immediately in front of them. You use your vocal cords to hack your own attention. You build a wall of sound around the one thing you need to accomplish. Think about the last time you were driving in heavy rain. The wipers are going, the glare from the headlights is blinding, the traffic is unpredictable. What did you do? You leaned forward, gripped the wheel, and started talking. Watch the brake lights. Stay in the right lane. Just ease up on the gas. You were not having a conversation. You were using audio feedback to stabilize a visual tracking system that was on the verge of failing. This is not a sign of a scattered mind. It is the exact opposite. It is the hallmark of a brain that refuses to lose its target. When the cognitive environment gets too loud, you become louder. You take control of the input. You decide what gets processed. If the first one already described you, subscribe, because the rest get more specific. But that's not the one that's going to bother you. Finding physical objects is practical. Hacking your visual cortex to find a missing item is just a survival trick. The real work begins when the problem is inside your head. Trait number 2. You manage cognitive load through the self-explanation effect. You are sitting at your desk. You are trying to assemble a new piece of software or fix a broken spreadsheet or figure out why your rent went up by $300 without any structural improvements to the building. The information is dense. The logic is tangled. The variables are shifting constantly. So, you start narrating the steps to the empty room. Okay, if they calculate the base rate from last year, then this percentage increase doesn't match the new lease. If I push back on this clause, they have to produce the original document. You aren't just reading. You are physically externalizing your working memory. The human brain can only hold about 4 chunks of information in active memory at once. That is a hard biological limit. It does not scale with intelligence. When a problem exceeds that capacity, the internal system stalls. It doesn't crash dramatically. It just quietly stops making progress. And you sit there rereading the same paragraph for the 4th time, absorbing nothing. You know the feeling. Your eyes move across the words, but nothing sticks. You reach the end of the page and realize you retained 0 information. Psychologist Michaeline Chi documented a phenomenon called the self-explanation effect. Her research showed that students who spontaneously explained steps out loud to themselves solved complex logic problems significantly faster than those who stayed silent. The gap wasn't marginal. The self-explainers consistently outperformed because they were catching their own errors in real time. Because silent thought is fast, associative, and full of blind spots. You can easily convince yourself you understand a complex concept when you don't. Your brain skips over the gaps. It assumes a connection exists just because 2 thoughts are near each other. It takes shortcuts that lead directly to failure. But speech is linear. Speech is unforgiving. If your logic has a hole in it, your tongue will physically trip over it. You cannot speak a broken sentence without hearing the break. Therefore, talking to yourself acts as an automatic error detection system. It forces you to pace your own processing. You take a massive, heavy cognitive load and you put it down on the table where you can look at it. It is like unpacking a crowded suitcase just to find the one cable you need. You lay everything out, item by item, syllable by syllable. You do this with everything. You do it when you are planning a massive project for remote work. The messages are piling up. The deadlines are overlapping. You are trying to structure your week. You refuse to stay confused. You use your voice to force clarity. You make the abstract concrete. You do not let your brain cheat. You force it to show its work out loud step by painful step. When other people hit a wall of confusion, they stop. They open a new tab. They scroll on their phone. They let the confusion win. They accept the fog. You don't. You start talking. You dismantle the problem out loud until the mechanics of it make sense. This means you have an abnormally high tolerance for complexity. You do not run away from difficult concepts. You simply translate them into a format you can manage. You take the intangible stress of not knowing how to do something and you reduce it to a sequence of actionable syllables. You talk yourself through the dark. And that was the common one. That is just how you solve a mechanical problem. Managing data is one thing. The next one is how you survive yourself. Trait number 3. You possess an elite form of emotional regulation. You just logged off a brutal video call. Or maybe you just read an email implying your department is facing layoffs. The adrenaline spikes. The cortisol floods your system. Your chest tightens. You walk into the kitchen and you speak out loud. Not to anyone, not into a phone, just into the room. But notice the exact syntax you use. You don't use the word I. You use your own name, or you use the word you. You say, all right, get a grip. You're fine. You can handle this. Stop spiraling. You think you are just venting to the drywall. You assume it is just the pressure bleeding off. You are actually triggering a biological circuit breaker. It is a documented psychological mechanism called illism. It creates profound psychological distance. Psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan ran a fascinating study. He put subjects in functional MRI scanners and subjected them to high-stress, deeply personal scenarios. He watched their brain activity in real time. When subjects used first-person pronouns to process the stress, their amygdala lit up instantly. The brain's threat center took over. They were trapped inside the emotion. They felt the panic as a physical weight. But when they shifted to third-person pronouns or used their own names, the threat response shut down in milliseconds. The brain's regulatory networks immediately took over. The prefrontal cortex re-engaged. The shift wasn't gradual. It was binary. First person meant drowning. Third person meant dry land. The only variable was the pronoun. Everything else, the scenario, the stakes, the emotional content stayed exactly the same. The brain simply changed how it classified the threat based on who it thought was being addressed. By changing one word, you trick your brain into thinking it is giving advice to a friend. And you are always much smarter, much calmer, and much more rational when you are solving someone else's problem. You remove the ego from the equation. You separate the emotion from the event. You pull the camera back. You are doing this constantly. You've done this in the bathroom mirror before a terrible first date from an app. You've done it sitting in your car in the gym parking lot staring at the steering wheel trying to convince yourself to go inside. You've done it after a fight with someone you care about. You walked into the other room, closed the door, and started narrating the situation to yourself in the second person. You didn't plan to do it, you just did, and within 90 seconds, the red haze started to clear. Your breathing slowed. You could suddenly see both sides of the argument, which was impossible 30 seconds earlier when you were still speaking in the first person. You thought you were cracking under pressure. You weren't. You were instinctively deploying a high-level cognitive intervention. You were becoming your own first responder. And it worked. The panic receded, the heart rate dropped. You handled it. You did not need a therapist in that exact second. You did not need to call a friend to talk you down. You ran the protocol on yourself. You recognized a dangerous spike in your own neurochemistry, and you used your voice to manually lower the temperature. Most people drown in their own anxiety. They let it wash over them. They become the panic. You step outside of it. You talk to the panic like it is an unruly child in the backseat of a car. You tell it to quiet down. If that described you, the next one explains something you've never told anyone. Trait number 4. You have aggressive cognitive flexibility. You are pacing your living room. You are facing a massive decision. Maybe it is about a relationship that isn't quite working or a job offer in a new city. You are arguing both sides of the outcome out loud, cutting yourself off mid-sentence to offer a rebuttal. If I take the new job, the money is better, but the commute ruins my morning routine. But if I stay, the company is stagnant and I get trapped. You are playing both the prosecutor and the defense attorney. In cognitive science, this is known as divergent thinking. It is the rare ability to generate multiple opposing solutions to a single prompt without freezing in panic. Silent internal thinking inevitably traps you in the same familiar mental grooves. Confirmation bias takes over rapidly in silence. You only see the evidence that supports the decision you already subconsciously want to make. You let yourself off the hook. Externalizing the thought creates a sparring partner. It is exactly like playing chess against yourself. You have to physically get up, walk to the other side of the board, and look at the pieces from the enemy's perspective to see your own blind spots. Most people cannot tolerate cognitive dissonance. They want a simple binary answer immediately. They choose the path of least resistance just to end the discomfort of not knowing. They rush the decision because holding two opposing ideas in their head physically hurts. You see this everywhere. Someone gets a job offer and decides within 48 hours. Not because the offer was clear, but because the ambiguity was unbearable. Someone ends a relationship on a Tuesday night because they couldn't stand one more week of not knowing where it was going. But you stretch the dissonance out. You force yourself to articulate the counter-argument. You poke holes in your own preferences. You hold both conclusions in the air at the same time and refuse to let either one land until the evidence forces a winner. You aren't indecisive. You are actively stress-testing reality. You are hunting for the flaw in your own logic before the real world finds it for you. You do not let yourself get away with weak arguments. You demand evidence from yourself. If you say a plan is going to work, your external voice immediately asks how. If you say a relationship is improving, your external voice demands an example. If you say a risk is worth taking, your external voice wants to downside spelled out in full. You are running a constant rigorous audit on your own life choices. You use your voice to break the echo chamber of your own head. You refuse to let your biases dictate your future. When you talk out loud, you force your brain to defend its own assertions. If the defense is weak, you discard the idea. You are ruthless with your own opinions. And that was the version most people can at least relate to. The next one, they can't. Trait number 5. You operate with constant reflective awareness. You are sitting on your couch typing a response in a group chat. The argument is petty. Someone made a passive-aggressive comment. You have the perfect, devastating reply typed out. Suddenly you stop. You look at the phone. You ask out loud, why am I even trying to prove this? In that exact second, your mind splits in two. There's the actor taking the action, and there is the observer watching the actor perform. Developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky theorized that children use private speech to navigate the physical world. They talk themselves through stacking blocks, crossing a room, solving a puzzle. Eventually, that speech internalizes into silent thought. But for you, that private speech remains a fully operational metacognitive mirror. It never went quiet, it just went private. Metacognition is simply thinking about your own thinking. It is the ability to step outside of your immediate emotional state and audit your own software. Most adults spend 0 hours a week evaluating the structural integrity of their own thoughts. They just act. They feel anger, and they send the text. They feel fear, and they cancel the plan. They do not investigate the architecture of their own reactions. But you interrupt the circuit. You evaluate your own motives in real time, which means you can never truly lie to yourself for very long. When you mess up, the observer knows. When you act out of ego, the observer calls it out. When you make a decision based on fear rather than logic, the observer replays it back to you in the shower the next morning. It is a demanding way to live. There is a profound weight to being your own objective witness. You carry a level of accountability that nobody else enforces on you. It separates you from the people around you. They are living on autopilot. You are manually driving the machine. It requires a tremendous amount of energy. But it makes you entirely immune to manipulation because nobody can tell you a lie about yourself that you haven't already investigated. Nobody can point out a flaw that you haven't already mapped out and spoken aloud in an empty room. You have already prosecuted your own failures. You have already cross-examined your own intentions. When someone else tries to critique you, they are usually months behind your own internal audit. You live in a state of continuous self-surveillance. It means you are hyper-aware of your own hypocrisy. When your actions do not match your values, the observer does not let you sleep. You will lie in bed at 2 a.m. replaying a moment where you were dishonest, or lazy, or unkind, and you will narrate it back to yourself until you understand exactly why you did it. But that isn't the one that keeps you up at night. Trait number 6. You are driven by autonomous motivation. A coworker asks what you are going to do about a massive project failure, or a friend asks how you're handling a quiet firing situation at work. You realize in that moment that you haven't asked anyone for advice. You have just been talking it through with yourself for a week. You didn't pull your friends. You didn't crowdsource the solution in a group text. You didn't ask your parents what they thought. You didn't even Google it. You just pace your apartment and talk through the options until one of them stopped falling apart under scrutiny. In self-determination theory, psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan separate motivation into controlled and autonomous categories. Controlled motivation requires external pressure, rewards, or social approval. Autonomous motivation comes entirely from within your own framework. People who talk to themselves constantly tend to exhibit incredibly low social monitoring. You do not constantly scan the room to see how you should behave. You do not need the crowd's consensus before making a move. Your internal logic is louder than their opinions. When you build the habit of arguing with yourself, you stop needing the world to tell you who you are. You trust your own process to reach the correct conclusion. You are perfectly fine with people. You go to work, you pay your rent, you smile at the barista, but at your core, your validation loop is entirely closed. You are your own primary advisor. You listen to external feedback, but you process it through your own internal machinery. If the crowd says to panic, but your externalized logic says you are safe, you do not panic. If everyone around you is celebrating a decision that your self-talk already identified as flawed, you don't celebrate. You wait. You are insulated from the hysteria of the group. You have built a standalone server. You do not require a network connection to function. This doesn't mean you ignore other people. It means you run their input through your own compiler before you execute it. When everyone else is running around trying to figure out what the socially acceptable response is to a crisis, you are pacing in your kitchen, talking to yourself, mapping out the actual physics of the problem. You are less interested in how people feel about the situation than in what is actually true about it. You do not care what the consensus is. You only care what the truth is, because you are the one who has to live with the consequences. You take full ownership of the outcome, so you take full ownership of the decision. Comment the number of the first one that you, if that described you, the final trait explains why you can never just turn it off. Trait number 7. You possess a massive need for cognition. The day is over, the work is done, the laptop is shut. You are lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and you are whispering to yourself about a logistical system at work that could be 10% more efficient. Or you are deconstructing a conversation you had 6 months ago, remapping the logic to see exactly where the communication broke down. Not because it matters anymore. Not because you are holding a grudge. Because you still don't understand it, and you can't leave it alone. The unsolved problem is louder than the silence. People would tell you this is anxiety. It isn't. It is a measurable psychological drive called the need for cognition. Psychologists John Cacioppo and Richard Petty define this as the tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful cognitive endeavors. The key word is enjoy. You are not torturing yourself. You are scratching an itch that never fully goes away. Your mind refuses to leave a puzzle unsolved. You don't analyze your failures to punish yourself. You analyze them because you cannot tolerate a gap in your understanding. You are actively, systematically evolving your own operating system. You treat your own life as a relentless, unforgiving feedback loop. Every mistake is just data. Every interaction is just a variable to be optimized. You don't do this because you hate yourself. You do this because your drive for mastery is constant. You are continually rewriting the code of your own behavior. When a patch fails, you don't roll back to an older version. You write a better one. It is an isolating process. Nobody else sees the work you put in. They don't see the hours you spend pacing, dismantling your own assumptions, breaking down your own ego. They just see the results. They think you are naturally resilient. They don't know that you engineer that resilience in empty rooms. They assume you just know how to handle stress. They have no idea that you talk yourself through every single time. You talk to yourself because you are the only peer you fully trust to handle the raw data. You cannot hand your unedited thoughts to someone else. They wouldn't know what to do with them. They would misinterpret the analysis as a breakdown. You build the bridge out of words, you cross it by yourself, and then you go back and check whether the bridge was built correctly. That is the part nobody else sees. They see you arrive on the other side. They never see the engineering. You do this because you understand at a level most people never reach that the mind has to be worked to exhaustion to grow. You push your own cognitive limits voluntarily. When a problem gets difficult, your instinct is not to quit. Your instinct is to start narrating the problem until you can see through it. You are running a constant diagnostic check on reality. You never assume you have the final answer. You are always looking for the upgrade. You are always looking for the blind spot. You are always asking yourself out loud what you missed. You aren't glitching. You're running a highly calibrated system. The fact that you caught yourself talking means your metacognition is online. Noticing the mechanism is itself the proof that it works. This week, when you catch yourself muttering in the kitchen about a project deadline, just let the sentence finish. The next video on screen breaks down exactly why people with high need for cognition end up isolating themselves and how to fix it. You've been your own best counsel this whole time. Keep talking.